John Harper had always longed for a fresh start. After a recent breakup and the grueling end to his last job, he decided to move to a new city, hoping to leave his past behind. The small but cozy apartment he found seemed perfect, located in a quiet neighborhood with friendly neighbors. Little did he know, this new beginning would turn into a nightmare. The first night in his new home was uneventful, but things took a strange turn on the second night. As he lay in bed, he heard muffled voices through the thin walls. At first, he couldn't make out what was being said, but it soon became clear that it was a couple arguing. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a regular spat. The arguing continued over the next few days, growing louder and more intense. The man's voice was harsh and domineering, while the woman's sounded desperate and pleading. John found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on his work or relax at home. He began to worry for the woman's safety but didn't know what to do. Should he intervene or call the police? One night, the argument escalated to a point where John could no longer ignore it. It was past midnight, and the shouting was louder than ever. Suddenly, there was a loud bang at his door. Startled, John jumped out of bed. As he approached the door, he could hear the sounds of the struggle right outside. He assumed the couple had moved their fight into the hallway. He cautiously opened the door and saw a woman running down the corridor, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Wait," he called after her, but she didn't stop. She disappeared around the corner, leaving John standing there, confused and concerned. Determined to help, John decided to contact the apartment owner the next morning. When he finally reached Mr. Thompson, the landlord, he recounted the events of the past few days, explaining his concerns about the fighting and the woman he saw fleeing. Mr. Thompson listened patiently before responding, "Mr. Harper, I'm not sure what to say. The apartment next to yours has been vacant for months. No one has lived there since the last tenant moved out 6 months ago." John felt a chill run down his spine. "That can't be right," he insisted. "I've heard them every night. I saw the woman last night. She was real." Mr. Thompson sighed. "You're not the first tenant to report strange occurrences from that apartment. The previous tenant, a young woman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances. Some say her spirit haunts the place, reliving the moments leading up to her death." John's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard stories of haunted places but had never believed in them. Now, he wasn't so sure. Determined to find out the truth, he asked Mr. Thompson for more details about the woman's death. The landlord hesitated before continuing. Her name was Emily. She moved in with her boyfriend, but things quickly turned sour. Neighbors often heard them fighting, and one night, it ended tragically. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. Her boyfriend was never found, and Emily's death was ruled an accident, though many believed otherwise. John felt a wave of nausea. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but it was more than he had bargained for. That night, he lay in bed, unable to sleep. The silence was deafening, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Just as he began to drift off, he heard the familiar sound of arguing. This time, it was louder and more urgent. Gathering his courage, John grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the empty apartment. The door was slightly ajar, and as he pushed it open, he was hit with a cold gust of air. The apartment was dark and empty, just as Mr. Thompson had said, but the voices were unmistakable, echoing through the empty rooms. He followed the sound to the bedroom, where the temperature dropped even further. The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the arguing stopped. John felt a presence behind him and turned to see a faint figure of a woman standing in the doorway. Her eyes were filled with sadness and fear. "Help me," she whispered. John's breath caught in his throat. "Emily?" he asked, his voice shaking. She nodded, tears streaming down her translucent face. "He's still here. He won't let me rest." Determined to help her find peace, John began to investigate the history of the apartment and its former tenants. He discovered that Emily's boyfriend had a history of violence and was wanted in connection with several other crimes. With this information, he contacted the police, who reopened the case. As the investigation progressed, strange occurrences in the apartment ceased. The arguing stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. One night, as John was getting ready for bed, he felt a presence in the room. Turning, he saw Emily standing there, a look of gratitude on her face. "Thank you," she whispered before fading away. John knew she had finally found peace. He continued to live in the apartment, and though he occasionally felt a chill in the air, he never heard the arguing again. The experience had changed him, opening his mind to the possibility of the supernatural and the lingering effects of unresolved tragedies. Life gradually returned to normal, but John would never forget the haunting cries for help from the apartment next door and the ghostly figure of Emily, who had brought a chilling reminder of the past into his present.